Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, August 20th, 2025. All right, this episode of Anti-War News is sponsored by Devolution Machine, which is an anti-war combat veteran-owned and operated precision machine shop that operates with those values in mind. Devolution Machine offers CNC turning and milling along with manual surface and cylindrical grinding services to support any non-defense related customer. Devolution Machine can manufacture in quantities of 1 to 1 million in materials ranging from hardened tool steel to soft plastics. The company's location in central Pennsylvania has not limited its ability to serve customers from its city of Williamsport to California to Florida. If you or someone you know is looking for manufacturing services in the United States from a values-based company, please reach out to Andrew at info@devolution-machine.com. And Devolution is spelled Devolution, and you can find that email in the description. Or look for them on Instagram at Devolution Machine to keep an eye out for coming expansions and products. Once again, that is Devolution Machine. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the IDF to call up 60,000 reservists for Gaza City. So about 60,000 Israeli reservists will receive call-up orders that the Israeli military will issue on Wednesday as it's preparing for a major offensive on Gaza City, and this was reported by the Times of Israel. The report said that reservists will have 2 weeks before they need to report for duty and that not all of them will take part in the offensive on Gaza City, since some will replace Israeli troops in other areas of Gaza. The Israeli military's plans to take over Gaza City involve the ethnic cleansing of over 1 million Palestinian civilians from the area. I know we've been kind of hammering this point home for the past week or so about what Israel's plans are for Gaza City, but I think it's really important, and I think it's important to call it what it is, ethnic cleansing, because if you look at the actual plans as reported by Israeli media, they're not just moving them out of the area. The plan, according to Haaretz, is to move them all out, force them all out, and then completely destroy the city. The IDF is expecting to spend over 1 year in the city to dismantle what they are calling Hamas infrastructure. But of course, that means just completely leveling the city to make it uninhabitable, like they did a little further north in Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun and in Jabalia. As I've mentioned a lot, the plans also involve, so they're going to issue evacuation orders, which they've done for some parts of Gaza City already, and they're expecting many civilians to stay behind because of obvious reasons, and they're prepared to fire artillery into the areas to force them to leave, or if they stay, I guess the implication there is that they're going to kill them. And so the IDF has not yet launched its ground offensive. It has ramped up strikes on Gaza City in recent weeks with a focus on the eastern Zaytun neighborhood. Thousands of Palestinians have already fled the area, and an investigation from Al Jazeera found that many of the Israeli attacks were hitting displacement shelters. Once the city is taken over, the IDF plans to spend more than a year destroying it, just as I mentioned. Another thing I mentioned in the story here is just a couple months ago, in May, Netanyahu told a Knesset committee that the IDF's destruction of homes, that the IDF is destroying all these homes and that Palestinians will have nowhere to return. And of course, the idea is to move them south, and then from there they want to force them out of Gaza. Still unclear exactly where they could go, but this is the plan. They openly speak about it. And this is, if they go through with this big offensive, of course, this is going to be paid for by our tax dollars. This is going to be completely supported by the U.S. government. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces kill 58 Palestinians in Gaza over 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said on Tuesday that Israeli forces killed 58 Palestinians and wounded 343 over the previous 24-hour period as U.S.-backed Israeli attacks continue across the Strip. The health ministry said that the bodies of 2 other Palestinians killed in previous Israeli attacks were also recovered. The majority of the dead, 31, were killed while attempting to reach food aid, and another 197 aid seekers were injured. The health ministry said that since the end of May, which is when the GHF began operating in Gaza, at least 1,996 people trying to get aid have been killed. Just a staggering number, almost at 2,000. And another 14,898 have been injured. On top of the violent deaths, the health ministry said that Gaza hospitals recorded 3 more starvation deaths due to the U.S.-backed Israeli blockade. And Israeli strikes on Tuesday included the bombing of displaced people in tents in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza, which killed at least 8 Palestinians. You can see that this picture shows some of the aftermath of that. Bombing literal tents. They've been bombing tents for so long now, but it's just, there's something about seeing the picture of the aftermath or, the sites of these airstrikes, and it's just, you just see tents. That's what they're bombing. And another strike on a tent in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, killed at least 4 people. Israeli shelling in the Sabra neighborhood of Gaza City killed at least 4 Palestinians, including another journalist. The IDF has killed more than 250 journalists in Gaza, just another staggering number, which is a phrase I tend to say a lot these days when we're talking about Gaza, but it's just uniquely horrific what's happening there. And again, I would recommend people, if you haven't listened to the interview that I did with Matthew Cockrell, who's a historian, we talked about some of the reasons why this is so uniquely horrific, what Israel is doing in Gaza and why it's a genocide. So the daily slaughter continues as they're preparing for this next big escalation. All right, so the next one here, Libyan official in talks with Israel to resettle Palestinians, which that's the Middle East Eye headline. That kind of makes it sound nice, resettling them. But this is a exclusive story from Middle East Eye. So a senior official in Libya's internationally recognized government has held talks with Israeli officials over a proposal to resettle hundreds of thousands of Palestinians expelled from Gaza, multiple sources have told Middle East Eye. Speaking on the condition of anonymity due to the sensitive nature of the issue, Libyan, Arab, and European officials told Middle East Eye that National Security Advisor Ibrahim Dabaiba, a relative of Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dabaiba, was spearheading the talks despite Palestinians in Gaza flatly rejecting U.S. President Donald Trump's post-war plan for the enclave. One Libyan source said that practical talks had already taken place, but the specifics were vague. Another Libyan source said that the discussions were still ongoing and that members of the Tripoli-based parliament were deliberately being kept in the dark as pro-Palestine sentiment runs deep in the country. The source said that in an attempt to placate some Libyan leaders, the U.S. was prepared to confer economic support or other benefits in exchange for the country taking in Palestinians. The source said that Ibrahim Dabaiba had already received guarantees that the U.S. Department of Treasury would release some $30 billion in frozen state assets. So, of course, this plan involves the U.S. Bribing countries to take in Palestinians to facilitate the ethnic cleansing. And so there's been other reports that they've been talking to Haftar, who's the warlord who controls the other part of Libya. He's denied it publicly. Other Libyan officials, I think, have denied, because there's been other reports that Israel's been in talks with Libya. I mean, just the idea. I mean, Libya, out of all places, this country that the U.S. and NATO just completely destroyed with the intervention in 2011. You still see all these stories about boats and, full of refugees sinking in the Mediterranean, people trying to flee this situation that was created by this disastrous U.S. and NATO intervention. And that's where they're going to send the Palestinians from Gaza. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't just so horrific. And of course, the other countries, Somalia, Sudan, they're talking about other war-torn African nations dealing with their own hunger issues and everything. So what we've seen is we've seen all these reports. Still, no country has publicly said, yeah, we're going to take the Palestinians. But the fact is the U.S. has a lot of leverage over these countries. So I think it is possible that some might eventually agree. And like the South Sudan thing, there was a report from AP which cited people going on the record, including an American who was hired to lobby for South Sudan. South Sudan denied it, but then like a few hours later, they announced that a senior Israeli official was there. It was in South Sudan, And we had a story yesterday that Israel announced it was providing aid to South Sudan for a cholera epidemic that they're facing, as if Israel's just, they're just doing that because they're such humanitarians, not like they have some other motive. So I think there's truth to these reports, but these countries just don't want to come out and say that they are potentially collaborating on this. All right, so the next one here, hostage families want Gaza ceasefire deal. So family members of Israelis who remain captive in Gaza are urging Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire deal that has been approved by Hamas, which mediator Qatar says is almost identical to a version previously approved by Israel. And the exact details are unclear, but the broad strokes are basically a 60-day ceasefire. Hamas releases 10 Israelis. Israel would release a certain number of Palestinians. And the idea would be to engage in negotiations for a long-term truce. And this is Einev Zangaker. I probably pronounced her name wrong, but her son Matin is being held in Gaza. She said, quote, we won't let Netanyahu thwart it this time. The entire people of Israel won't let you miss the last chance to bring back my Matan and all of the hostages, living and dead, end quote. According to Israeli media, Netanyahu has dismissed Hamas's acceptance of the proposal, although reports on Tuesday said that the Israeli government is examining the proposal. But several Israeli officials have already publicly rejected the idea of any kind of deal. And the argument, their position has shifted basically to whatever thwarts a deal. Before it was, we would never commit to a permanent ceasefire, to a permanent deal. They were trying to get Hamas to agree to a temporary deal. Hamas wanted stronger guarantees for a long-term ceasefire. So now that Hamas is apparently accepting a temporary deal, what we've seen in recent days from Israelis is, there's no, we're not going to agree to anything temporary, anything short-term. And the hostages and missing families forum. So there's been pretty significant protests in Israel calling for a deal. According to the Israeli media reports, over 1 million people were protesting on Sunday, which, that's huge for Israel. I saw pictures. I don't know. It's almost hard to believe that many people were on the streets, but certainly hundreds of thousands at least, based on just the pictures I saw. But they're calling for another protest this weekend. And of course, the reason kind of why I want to highlight this is because you see the rhetoric from Trump and the U.S. saying, the only way to get the hostages out is to destroy Hamas, even though that's like a sure way to get them killed. And it seems like Trump has, he clearly has much more sympathy for the Israelis being held in Gaza than the Palestinian children. Yet, even though their family members and former hostages are saying, make a deal, they actually released a video telling Trump basically, make Netanyahu make a deal. Trump is still just saying, he's going to support whatever Netanyahu does, even though the logic certainly does not add up. All right, so the next one here. So I want to read the whole headline, not just the one that we have on the page here. This is some headline. So Representative Green says that the U.S. should let Gaza children in for medical treatment and prosecute Israeli child predators. So Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene said in a post on X on Tuesday that the U.S. should allow wounded children from Gaza to enter the U.S. for medical treatment and should also prosecute Israeli child sex predators. I think it was Caitlin Johnstone. She retweeted the article on Twitter. She said, this headline just raises so many questions. Why is this a headline? How? And it is just so crazy, where we're at here. So, Green is referring to the recent State Department decision to block visas for Palestinians from Gaza in response to this outrage from Laura Loomer. She has significant sway over the Trump administration. And her outrage was over wounded Palestinian children arriving in the U.S. to get medical treatment, which funded by a private charity, not funded by the U.S. taxpayer. And, they're on visitor visas and they go back relatively quickly. So it's just so evil. it's just, there's just so much wrong with Laura Loomer's whole attitude. I mean, there's a lot wrong with Laura Loomer, but the fact that the State Department, and I saw Marco Rubio's justification, like, oh, we don't know who these people are. And I've seen other people involved in the process say, well, actually, it's a painstaking process to get these people first approved to leave Gaza. And Israel has to approve every single person. So that means they're screened by Israel, and they're also screened by the U.S. government. So, this idea that they're just like, it's just the whole thing is just absurd and evil. And there's so much wrong with it. But anyway, and then there's the other news of Tom Alexandrovich, a senior Israeli cybersecurity official who was caught in a sting trying to lure a 15-year-old girl into sex, and he was able to go back to Israel. And some things I want to write a follow-up on that, because there's a lot of details about that case, and people are reporting on it and investigating it. So I'm hoping more comes out and we could kind of put together a story on it. But certain things like the acting the U.S. attorney for the District of Nevada, guess what country she's from? This guy was caught in Nevada. Guess what country the U.S. attorney for Nevada is from? She's Israeli born, and she's just on the record saying all sorts of heinous stuff about Gaza. I mean, again, it's just, everything's just so absurd here. But so anyway, Marjorie Taylor Greene had a very normal response to this news. She said we should allow wounded children in for medical treatment, and we should prosecute Israeli child sex predators. That was her point in her post on X. So I'm going to read some of it. She said, quote, "We need to be the America that allows war-torn children to come here for life-saving surgeries, and the America that never releases a foreign child sex predator that our great LEOs caught. But in this circumstance, those war-torn children are from Gaza, and this foreign child sex predator is from Israel and works directly for Netanyahu. Let me guess, would it be anti-Semitic to drag Netanyahu's cyber executive director back and prosecute this POS to the full extent of the law, and at the same time let Palestinian kids who had their limbs and bodies blown apart receive surgeries in America?" End quote. And I mean, just the way she put it, it's just such a crazy, just so nuts. And also, and she makes the point that their surgery, their whole stay in the U.S. is funded by a private charity, unlike Loomer claimed at some point that it's the taxpayer. But again, it's all just so absurd. And the Congresswoman asked, she said, the most concerning question is why the U.S. would allow an Israeli child predator to leave the country despite the evidence against him. She said, quote, "Would we do that with a Mexican child sex predator, Chinese child sex predator, any other country's child sex predator? I know God does not discriminate in his love for children. Why should we?" End quote. And I included at the end, in 2020, there was a CBS News investigation that found that many Jewish American pedophiles flee to Israel, where they receive citizenship under the law of return. So the fact that they are pedophiles, fleeing for child sex crimes, does not impact them receiving citizenship in Israel. All right, so the next one here, Lebanon. Israel wants the UNIFIL peacekeepers out. This one's from Jason Ditz. So this is not really new news that Israel wants the peacekeepers in Lebanon out, but there's some new developments around it. So the UNIFIL peacekeepers in southern Lebanon have long been a thorn in Israel's side, both because they tend to find Israeli surveillance devices left in the area and because of international criticism on the numerous times Israeli troops started firing at the peacekeepers for no apparent reason, and has not been good PR for the IDF. So the peacekeeping mission comes up for review in the UN this month, and Israel has been pushing the U.S. to use its veto power to end the mission. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar is formally asking the U.S. to do so now, saying that the peacekeepers are ineffective. And it is arguable that they're ineffective at keeping the peace, considering what Israel has been doing in South Lebanon. But the U.S., for its part, does seem to be open to canceling it, but they're also saying they might be able to get concessions out of the Lebanese government in return for renewing the peacekeeper. So this is something that's going to be debated. I believe they started the debate on Tuesday and is going to be voted on this month at the UN Security Council. So we'll see what happens with that. And then the next one here, Israelis lay foundation stone for settlement in Syria beyond the Golan. So this article is from the New Arab. So a group of Israelis crossed the security fence in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights on Monday, holding a ceremony they described as laying the foundation stone for what they called the first settlement beyond the fence. So this is in Syrian territory beyond the Golan Heights, some of this territory that the Israeli military has captured and is occupying, post the regime change. So a group of Israeli settlers ran in there and they started saying that they're trying to establish a settlement. They want, in any land that the IDF occupies, they want to try to pop up settlements in Gaza, in Syria. We've seen this happen in southern Lebanon where settlers kind of run across the border. And of course, we know that the settlers have significant influence over this current Israeli government. So I would not be surprised if down the line we start actually seeing real settlements pop up in some of these Israeli-occupied territories beyond the territories they've occupied since 1967. All right, so the next one here, Trump may back European troops in Ukraine by air. So President Trump said on Tuesday that he may be willing to provide air support for European troops on the ground in Ukraine as part of a potential security guarantee, an arrangement that would be unacceptable to Russia. That's just a non-starter. Trump told Fox News, quote, "When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground." He's referring to the Europeans there. "We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you talk about by air, because no one has the kind of stuff we have. Really, they don't," end quote. The president also assured that U.S. troops would not be deployed to Ukraine. A day earlier, he would not rule out the idea of putting American boots on the ground in Ukraine. This picture here is from their meeting in D.C. With the European officials and Zelensky. So a group of European countries led by France and the U.K., which calls itself the Coalition of the Willing, which, of course, to me, harkens back to the Iraq War, the Coalition of the Willing, the countries willing to invade Iraq. I'm surprised they're using that label again. But anyway, they're pushing for an arrangement where they would deploy forces to Ukraine as part of a potential peace deal, despite Russia's repeated rejection and denial of any kind of agreement like that. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosted a virtual meeting of the group on Tuesday. Starmer's office said in a press release on the meeting that the British leader, quote, outlined that the Coalition of the Willing is planning teams would meet with their U.S. counterparts in the coming days to further strengthen plans to deliver robust security guarantees and prepare for the deployment of a reassurance force if the hostilities ended, end quote. A day earlier, Russia restated its opposition to the idea. As I mentioned yesterday, just a very strong statement saying, you're not sending any troops to Ukraine, basically. Axios reported on Tuesday that Trump had agreed with the Europeans that they should provide Ukraine with NATO Article 5-like security guarantees without bringing Ukraine into the alliance. And guess who's going to be leading these talks? Marco Rubio. So that's not a good sign. And the Axios report also said that Putin told Trump during the Alaska summit that he was willing to discuss the principle of security guarantees for Ukraine and mentioned that China could be one of the potential guarantors. And as I mentioned the other day, you had Witkoff say, oh, we got a big concession from Putin. He's going to allow NATO Article 5 style security guarantees. And I mean, there's no way that that's true unless he's referring to this arrangement that was discussed during the 2022 negotiations and was included in a draft peace deal, which I don't really understand completely here. But the idea is basically Ukraine would be a neutral state and there would be security guarantees from all different countries on both sides, the U.S., France, the U.K., also Russia and China. And Russia at the time wanted basically to be able to veto. The idea was all countries would have to unanimously agree on any action if Ukraine comes under attack. So this is very far from the U.S. and the U.K. and France giving Ukraine NATO-style guarantees. But this idea that they're talking about here, I mean, it's just a really bad sign that they're not going to go anywhere with the potential peace deal if they're really still talking about sending troops and the Coalition of the Willing and the U.S. backing it with some kind of air power. All right, so the next one here, India's Modi hails friend Putin and boosts China ties in tilt from the U.S. So this article is from the Straits Times, which is news outlet based in Singapore. So Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed Russian leader Vladimir Putin as a friend while his government moved to bolster relations with China. Another sign India is tilting away from the United States in the face of President Donald Trump's tariff threats. Mr. Modi held a phone call with Putin following the Russian president's summit with Trump in Alaska. During the conversation, the two discussed issues of bilateral cooperation and agreed to remain in close touch, according to an official statement from New Delhi. And so, again, this is showing that these threats and the tariffs that Trump started putting on India over its purchase of Russian oil is not going to do anything to stop India from, buying oil from Russia. And if anything, it's going to push them closer together. And I think that's very clear that would be the consequence. Maybe Trump realized that. That's why he stopped threatening to add more of these tariffs. But you got to think, if you're a China hawk in the Trump administration, you got to be upset about this, because India is obviously is seen as a major player in the future, in the strategy against China, and ties between India and China fell apart. What was it, 2020, when their troops clashed up in the Himalayas and several were killed. And then India moved closer to the U.S. and joined the Quad military drills and signed new military cooperation deals with the U.S. But now with this economic warfare, it looks like India is looking to cool things down with China a bit, and they're not going to just let the U.S. dictate who they buy oil from. So the strategy is very foolish. And I mean, there's a Financial Times column from Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, saying that India's purchase of Russian oil is opportunistic and deeply corrosive to efforts to halt Moscow's war machine. But again, just the idea, obviously I'm not a China hawk. I think the whole view of the China hawks is wrong. This idea that we should get ready for war over Taiwan, build up all these alliances. I think they're making war an inevitability. But if you're a China hawk, you got to have the sense to know that this is all just a big waste of time trying to turn India against Russia and everything. And you're just going to push these three giant countries closer together, Russia, India, and China. It's just so foolish. I just try to, this was like the Biden strategy, and what are they thinking? Is it just hubris? Are they just stupid? Or what are they trying to do here? Anyway, the next story here. So the U.S. deploys 3 destroyers near Venezuela. So the U.S. is deploying 3 Navy destroyers off the coast of Venezuela in a move aimed at pressuring President Nicolas Maduro, signaling what appears to be another push for regime change. So one U.S. official told Reuters that a total of 4,000 U.S. sailors and Marines are expected to be committed to the Trump administration's efforts in the Southern Caribbean region. U.S. officials say that the deployment is an effort to combat threats from Latin American drug cartels, as the U.S. has made the unsubstantiated claim that Maduro is the leader of a cartel, which seems to be, there's just no evidence for this. The accusation actually goes back to the first Trump administration, when then Attorney General Bill Barr indicted the Venezuelan leader over claims of narco-terrorism. The claim was made over alleged cocaine trafficking, even though data showed at the time that the vast majority of cocaine coming into the U.S. went through the Eastern Pacific rather than Venezuela's Caribbean waters. And it's something like, at the time, from the data, from U.S. government data, it showed 87% of cocaine that was going into the U.S. was going through the Eastern Pacific, and 7% went through the Caribbean. So it was clearly part of their just pressure and attempt at regime change in Venezuela. I actually wrote an article at the time about it in 2020, because there was an interesting aspect to this, is that Bill Barr, the Attorney General under the first Trump administration, he worked for the DOJ back in 1989 for George H.W. Bush. And he was involved in indicting Manuel Noriega, who, former CIA asset that George H.W. Bush took out with the invasion of Panama. So, some similar things here happening with Maduro. But again, there's just no evidence here that Maduro's a cartel leader, and it's clear that they're just trying to use this claim that they're going after cartels as some kind of new regime change push. At least that's what I think. there's also other signs that this could be for show. And I know some, I talked to Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil at the Ron Paul Institute event, and Anya wrote a book about the Venezuela coup, the attempt at the regime change during the first Trump administration. And she thinks a lot of this could just be posturing and pressure, because the U.S. also recently reversed its ban on Chevron pumping oil in Venezuela, and Venezuelan oil is now being shipped to the U.S. again. But at the same time, there's a lot happening here. So again, the context here is that they're sending Navy destroyers and 4,000 sailors and Marines down to the South Caribbean, saying they're going to take action against the cartels. And they're also claiming Maduro's a cartel leader. Caroline Leavitt, the White House, what do you call her, press secretary, was asked about this on Tuesday. And she was asked if the U.S. would put boots on the ground in Venezuela. And this was her answer. She did not say no. She replied, quote, "President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He is prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel, and Maduro, it is the view of this administration, is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this cartel. He has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into the country," end quote. So the Trump administration, of course, has taken other steps to signal that they're going to go for another regime change effort in Venezuela, including increasing the bounty on Maduro to $50 million. And they also labeled several cartels as specially designated global terrorists, including a group that they call Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Sun, which is a term used to describe an alleged network of Venezuelan officials that they claim are involved in drug trafficking, but it doesn't actually exist as an organization. Cartel de los Soles is not a real thing. That's just what they've called, the claim. It's just a claim from outsiders. It's what they call like the Venezuelan security apparatus that they claim is involved in drug trafficking, which they've never put out real evidence to back that up. And there's other false claims mixed in here. So the U.S. designated the so-called Cartel de los Soles over claims that it supports the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua and Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. Sorry, my Spanish is so bad. If anything, it should be the foreign language that I'm better at. So anyway, so again, the claim is that the gang, we're going to use the abbreviation TDA. There was actually recently a declassified U.S. intelligence memo that said it was unlikely that Maduro's government cooperates with or directs TDA. And it actually said that the government probably views it as a threat. But they're using this claim that they are linked to them and support them to designate this cartel that doesn't actually exist as a terrorist organization. And then you also have the claim that they're linked to the Mexican cartel, which according to Mexico's president, it was the first she even heard of the claim, and that there's no evidence linking. She's never seen any evidence linking Maduro to the cartel. So just a lot of BS flying around here. And I think it's pretty clear that they're using this cartel stuff to try to ramp up the pressure on Maduro. And Maduro is saying that he's activating a militia, 4.5 million militiamen, to cover the territory of Venezuela in response to these threats from the U.S. So things are heating up. And again, unfortunately, there are people on the right who are coming around to our side on Israel and everything, who believe that the U.S. should take military action against the cartels, which I think is very foolish in general. But this whole Venezuela thing, it's clear what I think they're using, like real grievances that Americans have over the fentanyl crisis and all the overdose deaths and everything. I think it's misguided. The instinct, the idea that people have that we can bomb our way out of this drug epidemic in the country, but it seems like they're taking those it's legitimate to be angry and want to do something about the opioid crisis, but to take that and try to turn it into a regime change effort in Venezuela is just like particularly an evil thing to do. Maybe evil's a little exaggeration, but you know what I mean. So anyway, the next story here, the last story, North Korea says that it will accelerate its nuclear program in response to the U.S. and South Korean war games. This one is from Kyle Anzalone. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said that Pyongyang will ramp up its nuclear weapons program in response to large-scale war games the U.S. and South Korea are conducting. According to state media, Kim said, quote, "The security environment around the DPRK is getting more serious day by day, and the prevailing situation requires us to make a radical and swift change in the existing military theory and practice and rapid expansion of nuclearization," end quote. So again, this is a response to the joint military drills. We've seen some small efforts at goodwill gestures from South Korea toward the North. The North hasn't really responded to them. They have said something like they could talk to the U.S. if they drop the demand for denuclearization, and there are signs that the U.S. might drop that demand. But right now, the war games continue, and tensions still seem to be rising. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Aaron Baker, "The Future of the GOP, Level-Headed and Anti-Genocidal." So this is at the American Conservative, and this guy, Aaron Baker, is trying to primary Randy Fine, and he's like a Republican conservative who's running on an anti-genocide, anti-Israel platform, basically. Not really anti-Israel, but the fact that he's coming at him from this angle is really significant. And I've heard that there are other people running in Republican primaries and elections who are running against aid to Israel. And this is going to be a growing trend, and the Israel lobby is panicking about this. But things are definitely changing. The next one here, James Carden, 63 years, nothing has changed. One from Gary Tafforn, "Apathy in Washington as Israel flouts U.S. laws." One from Michael A. Reynolds, "How decades of folly led to war in Ukraine." And our spotlight is from Jack Hunter, "How Ron Paul took a battering ram to GOP foreign policy." So please go check all that out. Lots of stuff going on. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing, all that stuff I always tell you. Follow us on social media. If you've noticed, we started doing some ads at the beginning of the show. We have the Expat Money Summit, which they've sponsored us in the previous years, but trying to make it a regular thing, have a sponsor for each show. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me. You can email me, davedecamp@protonmail.com. I want all kind of like family-friendly sponsors, even though I talk about such horrific stuff. There's certain things I just don't want to be advertising. But anyway, that is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.